So he won't call off the offensive, huh? No matter what they say, okay? But, he's usually like that, right? What? He not only won't call it off, he's ordered another new offensive around there. Wow. Okay. When? Tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Bye. December 30th, 1944. They came close to reaching Budapest early last month, but failed. And now it has taken all of these weeks since to fight their way around it from south, west, north, and east. But this week, the Soviets have surrounded the city, and the Siege of Budapest begins. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Red Army advanced around Budapest. In the Philippines, the fight on Leyte continued, and Bull Halsey's Third Fleet was savaged by a typhoon. But the big news all week was the German offensive through the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans could not break through, though they took several important points, and prepared for an attack against the important road hub, Bastogne. And as Christmas Eve turns to Christmas Day, at 3 a.m., the expected all-out German attack on Bastogne finally comes. Well, all out? It's supposed to feature the fresh 15th Volksgrenadier Division, but its colonel complains that he hasn't had time for recon or coordinating with the armor, so only 2 infantry battalions, 18 tanks, and some self-propelled guns can make it. Still, they join the 26th VG Division and attack west of the town at Champs. German planning regarding Bastogne was beginning to take on a desperate urgency. Model had ordered 5th Panzer Army to seize Bastogne at once to lance this boil. Consequently, the colonel's superiors replied that he must attack and should count on the tremendous advantage of surprise, since the Americans would be celebrating Christmas. The plan calls for them to enter the town already at 9 a.m. before Allied planes can appear overhead. So already by 10 a.m., 26th VG Division Commander Heinz Kokott knows it's not going to work. And the butcher's bill that day is large. As at Neuf last week, the Germans get to within 1.5 kilometers of Bastogne, but they do not get closer. Meanwhile, elements of the 4th Armored Division from U.S. 3rd Army have been trying to reach the defenders, as we saw last week. But by late afternoon the 25th, they're having issues advancing along the route they've been ordered to follow. But by taking a shortcut and blasting through Assenois, led by 40-ton M4 Sherman tanks, including Cobra King, the first to breach the Bastogne perimeter, they break through the enemy and into the 101st Airborne lines. On the 26th, the Siege of Bastogne is over. But what about the units that bypassed Bastogne last week to drive for the Meuse? As we saw, 2nd Panzer Division advanced farthest to not far outside Dinant. As this week begins, they are the point of a wedge that has 1/16th Panzer Division to the east near Autun and Panzer Lehr Division to the southeast west of Saint-Hubert. They do have serious fuel problems which limit mobility, but an even bigger problem for them is the failure of Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army on their right to make any blocking screen east and south of Liège. Since 6th Panzer Army could not overcome the Elsenborn Ridge position, the east-west roads they might use for such a screen are under Allied artillery fire, so they again have traffic jams. This causes serious deployment issues. 9th SS Panzer Division is sent in Wave 2 on the 18th, and they don't even reach the front until the 22nd after covering 70 kilometers? That's it. 6th Panzer Army failed to develop the momentum and achieve room to maneuver sufficient to perform its blocking mission. Left to its own resources, 5th Panzer Army's advance slowed to a crawl. Such was its sorry state. Its spearhead was scattered all the way back to Bastogne, its most advanced units without fuel, that on the 24th of December, Model ordered its advance guard to proceed on foot to the Meuse. The dream of a blitzkrieg had died. What 5th Panzer Army is also facing is a defense by the 82nd Airborne Division, trying to block the path to Liège and defending the Salm salient. When British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, now in command of the Allied Northern Group, arrives at U.S. 18th Airborne Corps headquarters the 24th, he wants them to pull back to tidy up the front, as they are strung out in unplanned defenses. This is not what Airborne Corps Commander Matt Ridgway wants, but Monty is adamant. You could say what you will about Monty, especially about his personality, but in one of his most important positive contributions to the battle, Montgomery demanded a withdrawal north to a better position. Here was military science displayed by a master grand tactician, overcoming the unthinking bulldog tenacity that characterized most American combat decisions. When a ferocious German attack hit the 82nd 2 days later, it was repulsed after bitter fighting. The outcome would have been different had not Monty insisted upon the retreat. Ridgway estimates that 15,000 men and 100 tanks escaped the Somme salient. But that many tanks were also lost, and casualties were nearly 5,000. And some of Ridgway's subordinates will bear him a grudge for not withdrawing until ordered, when the situation was described as Custer's last stand. But Allied counterattacks have begun. An ultra-intercept decoded just after Christmas revealed that Modell's army group was fast running short of serviceable tanks and assault guns. Despite recent losses, the U.S. 1st, 3rd, and 9th Armies alone had almost 4,000 tanks. But disagreement over when and where to strike back divided Allied commanders. 2nd Armored Division from Joe Collins' 7th Corps asked command on the 24th to attack the 2nd Panzer Division spearhead near Dinant after learning that they're short on gas. They attacked the 25th backed by heavy air power, and that, and the lack of enemy mobility, wins the fight spectacularly. Over the next couple days, they either destroy or capture 82 tanks, 83 artillery and anti-tank guns, and 500 other vehicles. The clear weather ends the 28th, and with it, Air Force support. But still, once again, the German spearhead has been destroyed at its farthest penetration. But Bernard Montgomery does not see this, does not see that the German power of this offensive has been broken. He not only thinks the Germans are preparing to launch another big attack here, but that U.S. 1st Army is completely spent as a fighting force. He will write in a letter, "It was useless to pretend that we were going to turn this quickly into a great victory. It was a proper defeat, and we had better admit it." But it isn't. 1st Army holds firm from Dinant to Elsenborn. Bastogne is relieved. The German advance has been completely halted. In fact, American generals Omar Bradley and George Patton think the enemy is overextended, and they should counterattack across the shoulders of the Bulge. Monty vehemently disagrees. And then things begin to spiral. Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower is starting to chafe at Monty's caution and is wondering when, in whatever form it shall take, the main counterattack will come against the Bulge. They meet the 28th and talk over the plan for 7th Corps to squeeze the enemy from north and south and meet at Oufalise. But Montgomery is vague about when this will go off. Deflecting Eisenhower's impatient request for a date certain, Montgomery urged development for a master plan for the future conduct of war, one in which all available offensive power must be allotted to the Northern Front, preferably with a single commander. Eisenhower shows him out, but has gotten the impression that the attack will begin days from now on January 1st. That is not correct. Then a bunch of things happen. In short, in very short, Montgomery writes a letter to Eisenhower saying they have just suffered a great defeat, and it shouldn't have happened, and more defeats would come unless Eisenhower puts one man in charge of all Allied forces in Northwest Europe. One man, Bernard Montgomery. There will be some serious fireworks next week in Allied Command. Do not miss that. As for the rest of the week in the Bulge, there's a bit of a lull for a couple days as the Allies get more counterattacks ready. On the 30th, 8th Corps begins attacks northward from between Bastogne and Saint-Hubert, aimed at Oufalise. The final German effort to close the Bastogne corridor fails, and 5th Panzer Army Commander Hasso von Manteuffel abandons hope for offensive success. On December 25th, OKH Chief of Staff Heinz Guderian meets with Adolf Hitler and command and entourage. Guderian wants Hitler to break off the Ardennes Offensive and move as much force to the Eastern Front as possible. Reinhard Gehlen, in charge of intelligence in the East, has written a brief for Guderian explaining that the Soviets are going to attack soon and attack in force. The Eastern Front is now half the length it used to be, now just around 2,000 kilometers, which might be more defensible, but still, the Soviets have 6 million men massed on their side of the line, and Gehlen's report, which is based on POW interrogations, says the Soviets will attack at the latest in the middle of January. He thinks the Soviets will try to draw force away from the center and from Army Group A by hitting hard in Hungary, but then developing the attack along the main axis. Hitler rejects suggestions for adding force in the east for lessening the blow whenever it comes. There are still all those divisions in Courland. He wants them to stay there. Evacuating Norway or bringing up all the southern armies is no-go, too. He also overrules the idea that the battle line be separated from the main line by several kilometers. The idea in doing so would be for the Soviets to waste men and ammunition attacking the front line, only to find the bulk of the Germans at the main line further back. The result of ignoring this advice was simply an invitation to disaster. Major defensive positions and the few available reserves were bunched up to present one prime target, all under the barrels of the Russian guns. Not content with throwing out Guderian's arguments on tactical methods, Hitler also debunked the talk of a forthcoming Soviet attack as so much rubbish, dismissing Gehlen's reports out of hand and ridiculing the idea of a massive Soviet armies about to fall on the Reich. Furthermore, Hitler not only has no plans to stop the attacks in the West, he has plans for another offensive there, one to take back Alsace called Operation Nordwind. But there is still heavy active fighting in the east this week. The new Soviet drive to encircle Budapest, which made some real gains last week, continues this week. This is by Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front and Fyodor Tolbukhin's 3rd. On the 24th, Malinovsky has 6th Guards Tank Army turn south from where they finished last week and make for Esztergom. This they do, facing heavy enemy resistance, but backed by elements of 7th Guards Army, they reach the Danube north of Esztergom the 26th. As for Tolbukhin's front, they clear Bichke the 24th, head north for Esztergom, and clear it later that day. And on the 26th, when the two fronts link up, Budapest is now completely isolated. The main German base is at Komarno, and some of Tolbukhin's forces are only like 30 kilometers from it. But importantly, he's now trapped a really good-sized force of Germans in the bend of the Danube north of Budapest. So what he does now is really reinforce his line from east of Komarno down to Lake Balaton. Malinovsky, meanwhile, has put together 3rd Corps Budapest Group, 2 Soviet armies and 1 Romanian, and they start fighting to break into the city the 26th, but still cannot by the end of the week. Soviet troops stood between 7 and 10 miles from the city center, with the greater distance on the Pest side, though Pest with its level ground and good road system offered better facilities for organizing an assault. Inside the ring, the Soviet command reckoned that as many as 12 divisions had been trapped, in all 188,000 men. Within the city itself, 4 German divisions together with Hungarian units were locked in and became perforce the defending garrison. The night of the 28th and the morning of the 29th, loudspeakers repeatedly blare out Soviet terms for the surrender of the city in German and Hungarian. On the 29th, emissaries from both 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts head for the city under white flags. The truck of the former, Miklos Steinmetz, gets fired on anyhow and then gets blown up by a mine. The latter is passed through German lines blindfolded, but German command in the city refuses to enter into any talks or even hear any suggested terms. When he, Captain I.A. Ostapenko, passes again through the lines, he is shot in the back. Hitler has no intention of giving up Budapest. So determined is he that he's shaken up his command. At the end of last week, Army Group South Commander Johannes Friesner was summarily dismissed and replaced by Otto Wöhler. Guderian then told the new commanding generals they should have only one battle cry: attack, by patrols, locally, or on a big scale. Germany, he said, could not afford a setback in Hungary that would force it to divert forces from the successful offensive in the west. The fate of the Reich was at stake. Over the past few weeks, they have actually finally beefed up the city's defenses. The bridgehead extends around the city to the west. There are loads of barricades and tank traps. Buildings and houses are fortified. Karl Pfeffer-Wildenbruch commands 6 divisions, as it turns out, 4 German and 2 Hungarian as the city garrison. It's formidable. But hey, what about the actual city dwellers in Budapest, the people? Prime Minister Ferenc Szalasi has half-heartedly told the people to maybe evacuate, and they haven't done this anyhow. And the Germans have not ordered any evacuation since the slice of Hungary they still control, which keeps getting smaller, is full of refugees, and any more would have to be taken into Austria or Germany, which they do not want to do. But even while Christmas shopping is merrily continuing in Budapest, there are already reports of death from the effects of malnutrition. And the Army Group Chief of Staff had told Guderian that the Army Group opposed putting troops into a siege in which they would also have to stand off over 1 million starving people. Guderian had replied that the question was immaterial. Guderian has perhaps changed his mind about a couple of things, though. After a request from Wöhler, Guderian talks with Hitler about the situation the 24th, and unlike last week, the Army Group is allowed to now take a couple divisions from the Budapest bridgehead to fight the encirclement. It is by then too late. Army Group South cannot stop Tolbukin from reaching Esztergom and closing the ring, and the siege of Budapest has begun. The Allies are winding something down, though, in Italy, the Gothic Line campaign. Now, U.S. 4th Corps faces the German 148th and 232nd Infantry Divisions, and the Italian Monte Rosa Division. German command has decided to attack the Green American 92nd Division in the Serchio River Valley. This goes off the 26th, spearheaded by elements of the 148th. And it is a success, with the Germans and then the Italians advancing 25 kilometers into the 4th Corps lines. Reinforcements from the 8th Indian Division arrive after dark. The Germans withdraw the next day, though, and it turns out it isn't so much an offensive as a recon in force. The ease of the operation does cause consternation in Allied command, and on the 28th, Mark Clark postpones a planned push for Bologna, and spoiler, tomorrow on the 30th, Harold Alexander will call it off. They will wait for spring. Clark, by the way, is not commanding 5th Army anymore. He is now Allied Armies in Italy commander, and Lucian Truscott has taken over 5th. Harold Alexander is now Supreme Commander in the Mediterranean, and the former top dog, Henry Wilson, has gone to Washington, D.C. to replace the deceased John Dill as head of the British Joint Chiefs of Staff. But although there is still fighting here and there, the Gothic Line campaign is generally over for the season. At first sight, the Gothic Line campaign appears similar to the Gustav Line campaign of 1943-44, except for the lack of notable key battles such as Cassino and Ortona, and for the fact that, as a goal, the Po River Valley was no substitute for Rome, and the value of the campaign has frequently been overlooked. But between August 16th and December 15th, U.S. 5th Army lost 21,500 men, British 8th Army around 27,000 the same period, and the Germans, over the whole theater the last 4 months of the year, around and possibly more than 75,000. That is a third of the German losses for the entire Italian campaign. So contrary to what many may think, you cannot really call this a minor campaign. Winston Churchill is around the Mediterranean this week, actually. The British Prime Minister is in Athens on Christmas Day. There is a plot afoot by anti-British elements to blow up the hotel where British command is, but it's called off when the plotters realize that Churchill himself is there, though he isn't actually staying at the hotel, as it turns out. Negotiations between Churchill, the Greek government, and EOM, the Greek National Liberation Front, take place the 26th. The communist element of EOM is especially intransigent, and the only thing they all agree on is having Archbishop Damaskinos of Athens as regent, so the negotiations in general are a failure. But today, the 30th, the appointment of Damaskinos is published. On January 2nd, Georgios Papandreou will resign as prime minister, and Damaskinos will appoint Plastiras. The fighting between Elas, the military wing of EOM, and the British still continues, though. The fighting in the Philippines, now 2 months old, continues as well this week. On Leyte, elements of the U.S. 77th Division are heading west to try and reach and take Palompon. But it's taking time since the Japanese have destroyed the bridges in the hills. So the Americans mount an amphibious landing, and 2 battalions take the town without a fight. They head east from the coast, and when they meet the western-headed forces tomorrow, spoiler, Japanese resistance on Leyte is effectively over. Well, organized resistance. On the local level, there will be fighting north and south of Palompon for a few more months, and some of it will be pretty fierce. There is also a Japanese naval attack this week, the 26th, against the American beachhead on Mindoro, established last week, by 2 cruisers and 6 destroyers who've come over from Indochina. They lose 1 destroyer to a PT boat. This is the last attack by a Japanese naval force around the Philippines. George Kenney's Air Force planes are currently moving from Leyte to Mindoro to be in place for coming Allied attacks on Luzon. But it isn't until the 28th that a second airfield on Mindoro is complete. So most of them are still flying from Leyte, and bad weather and logistics are really hampering their ability to protect American shipping from kamikazes. And worse, the escort carrier pilots were finding that their Wildcat fighters were not matching up to the new kamikaze types. The Japanese were adding armor to their planes, improving attack maneuver, and maintaining extensive reconnaissance. At the same time, American ships were finding their 5-inch anti-aircraft guns with proximity fuses inadequate. What was most worrying about this evolution of suicidal air warfare was that destroying most or almost all of a kamikaze attack group did not constitute success. It only took 1 such plane to destroy a ship. Over the few weeks of the Mindoro assault period, kamikazes sink or knock out of action 15 ships. Still, American Commander Douglas MacArthur is gathering force for the Luzon landings, the largest assault landing of the Pacific War so far, set to go off January 9th. The Armada has been arriving the past couple of weeks from New Guinea, the Solomons, New Caledonia, New Britain, and the Admiralties, and next week it will be heading for Lingayen Gulf. And this week ends with the German offensive failing to take Bastogne, failing to reach the Meuse and having serious issues with mobility. Some real tension between Montgomery and the Americans about to explode, Budapest under siege, fighting in Italy and Leyte winding down, and Churchill in Athens. Also, from the 24th to the 26th is the Agana race riot on Guam. That you can learn more about on our Instagram day-by-day coverage of the war, which you can also find here under the Community tab. And Time magazine names Dwight Eisenhower Man of the Year for 1944. I mentioned that Christmas meeting with Guderian and Hitler and senior officers. Guderian and Hitler actually have dinner together Christmas Eve at the Adlerhof in the Taunus Mountains. Guderian asks Hitler to call off the Ardennes Offensive and send force to the east. By now, it is pretty clear, at least to Guderian, that the Ardennes Offensive is not going to achieve its objectives, and north of the Carpathians, the Soviets have assembled a gargantuan force, according to OKH. Hitler says, sure, call the offensive off. No, he doesn't. He laughs at the OKH figures, calling the buildup the greatest bluff since Genghis Khan, and will not take force from the west, or Norway, or Courland to make reserves for Army Groups Center and A. Heinrich Himmler is also there, and he literally tells Guderian not to worry so much. The Soviets are bluffing and will not attack. Then, on Christmas Day, Hitler orders the headquarters of the 4th SS Panzer Corps and 2 Panzer Grenadier Divisions sent away from Army Group A and down to help relieve Budapest. You know, other than things like feigning retreats, Genghis Khan did pull off a notable bluff. He once had a Chinese fortress under siege, and he apparently said that he would end the siege if he was given the gift of 1,000 cats and 10,000 swallows. The fortress commander complied. When the gift arrived, the Mongols tied cotton wool to the tails of each of the cats and swallows and then set it on fire. Then the cats and birds ran or flew in terror to their lairs and nests in the fortress, starting hundreds of fires, and during the chaos and confusion, the Mongols stormed the fortress. Do the Soviets on the Eastern Front have 100,000 cats and 1,000,000 swallows ready to set fire to, who will race to their homes in the German lines and cause untold conflagrations? No. They have 100,000 artillery pieces and 6 million soldiers. That may do the trick. This is Christmas week, well, holiday week in general, and the new year is soon upon us. In 2023, there are several military conflicts raging around the globe just now, at least they are today when we're shooting this. One cannot but hope that neither they nor any other reach anything approaching the scale of the Second World War. I think everyone hopes that. So that statement might be a bit generic. What should never become generic, though, are our wishes for your safety, security, and above all, your happiness wherever you are, this week and every other. See you next year.